Welcome, 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 everyone. Welcome to Black Man Speak. I'm your co-host, the J.R. Stewart.
And I'm your co-host, D. Tommy D. Duncan III, otherwise TD3. Jimmy, it is the first Wednesday of July, the 5th, 2023. And if it's Wednesday night,
It's certainly Black Man Speak. So let's give a big shout out to Liquid for providing our theme music. I hope you guys enjoy it. I picked that one out myself. And for Forest Films and our own studio for providing our virtual studio to make this show possible. And if you haven't already, please hit that like button. Help our numbers out. Hit the subscribe button so you'll be notified when we upload new shows, which is every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Central. And if you haven't already, please invite a friend so you guys can have something interesting to talk about. Tom, I know we have another show with some very interesting and fascinating, intelligent guests. I'm not sure how you do it, man, but you manage to do it week after week after week. We're bringing on these heavyweights to the show, which I'm delighted. So, with that being said, Tom, let's jump into our first segment so we can get this over with, so we can bring our lovely guest on and get the party started.
all right, we want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. We're looking forward to another very exciting show. Jimmy,
Yes.
it's been kind of interesting in the news this last couple of weeks, so we do want to have a brief conversation on some things that have happened since our last show, and then
Let's
we'll
jump
go
into it.
to the meat and potatoes of the conversation. First, we want to acknowledge a few folks who have now become ancestors. Jimmy, on June the 29th, at the end of last week, 2023, Mrs. Willie Christine King Ferris, who was an educator,
Hmm.
civil rights activist, and the eldest sibling of the Dr. Martin Luther King,
King,
who
correct.
became an ancestor at the tender age of 1996. Jimmy, she's also a sorority sister of ours, a member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated.
I knew there was something special about her.
Absolutely. So she's, she taught at Spelman College. She authored several books, was a public speaker, and was in essence a Renaissance woman. And we've got a lot of giants, Jimmy, that we are losing. So we have to take the time to honor and acknowledge those who are now becoming in the realm of our ancestors, whose knowledge, guidance, and legacy we can still draw on for our strength as we continue to move forward.
Well, Tom, those people have to be replaced. We just can't keep losing our giants and not replacing them.
Gotcha. So we have to become a part of the giant building community. That's one of
Correct.
the reasons why we do what we do. But also, Jimmy, on June the 28th, just a day before, a legend, or one among many legends, passed, Mr. Homer Hodes, who I believe is among the last, I don't know if he is the last, but among the last of the Tuskegee Airmen, passed at the tender age of 96, just
I think
two
he was
days.
the last time.
I didn't know if he was the absolute last, but I know he was almost the last, just 2 days after his beloved wife, Lucinda, uh, yes, Lucinda passed as well. And
Hmm.
it's kind of interesting because when I was doing the research on this, when you consider when this happened, his family didn't even know that he was part of the Tuskegee Airmen Brigade until 2009.
That's
and
sad.
and one of his I think grandchildren asked him, well, why didn't you say anything? And he in essence said, when they came back home from the war, there was no parade for them,
Correct. It
there was
wasn't.
no celebration for them. No one said thank you for their service, and so he just figured no one cared. And so as a result, he never really said anything about it. And these gentlemen were heroes.
Well, Tom is the same as the Freeman Cemetery. It's the same thing. I mean, when I stop by there to pay my respect, I'm always saddened by the care of it. And it seemed like I know the city has a charge of it, but it seemed like the black community here in the DFW area should take a little more personal responsibility for it and look to some extra care for it to make sure that it's maintained well. So that's just how we operate, Tom. We need to change our mindset and the way we operate when it comes to our elders and our historic ancestors.
Absolutely. And then we will go to some very interesting news in business. Taco Bell, yes, the Taco
Yes,
Bell
new
franchise
CEO, Tom. I was
has has
I didn't
named a
know if we
new
could
CEO.
include him this week or definitely going to have him added to next week's storyline. But I'm glad you mentioned it. Yes.
So Mr. Not Ralph, I'm thinking of the music. Sean Tresvant has been named the new CEO of
Taco Bell.
Bell, who will start, I believe, on January the 1st, 2024. He is a native of Washington State, uh, went to Seattle University and Washington State University to get his advanced degrees, Jimmy, but has also worked for such brands as PepsiCo,
Hmm.
Sports Illustrated, and the Nike brand before going to Taco Bell. Now, I'll be honest with you, Jimmy, I'm not a big Taco Bell. I don't really eat a lot of Mexican food. I'm not a big Taco Bell guy. But you know what? After January 1st, I might have to go buy me a chicken taco just to acknowledge
uh,
for being the CEO of Taco Bell.
I'm with you, Tom. I don't eat a great deal of their food. Every now and then, the wife and I may stop by there if we're traveling somewhere for a quick meal. But I definitely will maybe increase my patronage of their restaurants now for next year. We'll see what happens.
So this is actually, fantastic news.
Fantastic news, yes, for their growth.
Fantastic news, and of course, we
Congratulations.
wish him the best of luck and the growth of the franchise as he moves forward, given what he's done with Nike, Sports Illustrated, and all of these other internationally renowned brands. And also last week, Jimmy, a lot of interesting news from the federal courts. The Supreme Court
SCOTUS,
of
yes.
the United States was very busy and came down and wrapped the gavel on multiple areas, including affirmative action, of course, the student loan forgiveness program, and then, of course, a ruling as it pertains to a business in Colorado and its being required to provide services to a same-sex couple, Jimmy. But I think probably the biggest one in terms of news was probably, of course, the striking down of affirmative action when it comes to college admission.
That's correct, Tom. And so for those who are supporters of affirmative action and believe in it, this is pretty much, it's not the death blow, but it is a start. So this ruling really affects higher education and colleges and universities and their acceptance policies.
Yes.
But if a Republican is elected in 2024, the top three Republicans have all vowed to end affirmative action in the federal workplace. So what that's going to mean is that Lyndon Baines Johnson basically passed an executive order requiring federal contractors to align their hiring policies with other those policies of the federal government are. And so when Nixon confirmed, affirmed, and signed the law, affirmative action, that became sort of de facto rule at the federal level also, which trickled down into the federal contracting workforce, which is about 20% of our economy, Tom. But that's going to be eliminated at the federal level
But I
also.
mean, but Jimmy, when you look at the abysmal amount of that money that's going into our community, I mean, 1% maybe.
Yes, Tom, it's not necessarily a dollar amount. For me, it's a matter of principle. I think affirmative action, even though it was beneficial in the beginning, certainly instrumental in opening some doors for a large number of people, professionally and academically. But I think now we're at a point where we can safely let it go. I think we chronicle a lot of these kids on the show who have done exceptionally work, and it just comes down to a matter of how you apply yourself. I get irritated when I hear these black folks who've worked hard to achieve something somehow believing they're exceptional. It bothered me when Obama and his wife, got on public access and started talking about exceptional, how some black folks are exceptional. No black folks are exceptional. We all have the same ability, Tom. And if you made it into Harvard, guess what? Other black kids can make it into Harvard also. Um, and so when all this came down, I asked the wife, I said, well, how did W.E.B. Du Bois make it into Harvard? He was the first graduate with a PhD out of Harvard, black person out of Harvard back in the 1800s. How did he do it without affirmative action? So obviously, there have been lots of black folks who've gotten into Harvard without affirmative action, who've graduated Harvard, and have moved on. So this is not the death stroke that has been described as. All it means is that our kids have to step up to the plate and work their butts off the way other kids if you were interested in going to Harvard or any other top university. And
Well,
I believe our kids can do it. I mean, we have those kids on there. We talk about them every week, how a lot of black kids are doing exceptional things, Tom. If you simply take the time out, and if we don't have a guest speaker for next week lined up,
we
I do
do.
have we do I do have a city council from my town whose father raised her and her siblings very strict and pushed them to be exceptionally academically, which they did, and she's raising her children to be the same. And so I've invited her to be a guest on the show to talk about that process. But I believe in our kids, Tom, so I don't think this is a death stroke that many are trying to make us panic into believing it is. Our kids will be just fine. We'll be just fine.
Well, if we can have a intellectually honest conversation about what's happening and what's not happening, and we truly want to believe the narrative that this is supposed to be based upon merit across the board, then what needs to happen is they need to be intellectually honest about it and make it across the board, which means that, okay, if we decide to eliminate affirmative action, which opened the doors, because historically, our children of other cultures who had been held back for decades upon decades, weren't going to get the opportunity fairly. And so doors had to be forced open so that they can have an opportunity to the best education in some of the best schools. Now, if we want to talk about merit, then okay, let's be just as vociferous about eliminating merit based upon your grandfather going to, say, at Harvard University,
The
or
legacy children, Tom.
the legacy children.
But here's the thing: the
Or
legacy worked both ways. You have black graduates,
Mhm.
Hispanic graduates, Asian
Right,
graduates of Harvard, who
right,
their kids will be a legacy consideration also.
right,
So
right.
legacy wouldn't be just based on race; it'd be
No, no,
based
no, no.
on.
It should not be legacy, period, if we're talking about merit, because legacy has nothing to do with merit.
Well, Tom, the Supreme Court ruled on the constitutionality of the action, not on what you do financially to maintain your school economically. That's legacy-based acceptance is about money. A lot of
Of
those
course,
times,
of
legacy
course.
parents give back to the school in heavy ways. So when you're donating a wing to the library or books or putting
Right,
money into
right,
the
right.
scholarship fund, then yes, you're probably your child to the school, that child should be given some extra
Why?
consideration on
Why?
acceptance. But that's not
Why?
based on color,
Just
Tom.
because your grandparent did something doesn't mean that
That mean that
what
means if
you're
your
saying,
parents
Jimmy,
and grandparents
don't hold
graduated
a
from
place
Harvard
for my
also,
kid, even though they may be dumb as rocks
they
because their
could
great
be.
grandparent went to, no, Jimmy, that's come on
But
now.
last
Oh,
time I checked, the
goodness.
Obama graduated from Harvard, and if either one of his daughters wanted to go to Harvard,
They
I'm
need to
pretty
be
sure
smart enough to, they need to be smart enough to go
that
to
they could probably have gotten in just on legacy alone because their daddy graduated from Harvard.
I understand, but what we're saying is if we're going to be honest across the board and saying this should be based upon merit, it needs to be based upon merit. We shouldn't be making exceptions just because, 60 years ago, our grandparents
But
couldn't
that
even
wasn't the
go.
argument, Tom.
Our grandparents couldn't even go to the
Merit,
and
the,
so
the, the,
again,
the analysis of merit wasn't the issue. It was a legal issue whether you can discriminate legally. That's what the issue was,
well, there was a
constitutionally.
point, but there
That
was a
they
point
don't.
in time
The
where
Supreme Court's not going to be looking at anything else. They're not be weighing anything else. It's just a matter of can you legally discriminate? And the answer is no, based
mhm,
on the 14th Amendment. We're supposed to have equal protection under the law, so legally you cannot discriminate. And that's
mhm.
all they were saying. Now,
Okay.
whether you could do merit, legacy based acceptance, that wasn't the issue. And obviously, the answer is yes. You can accept people for any other reason that you want to. You just can't legally discriminate. You want to base
Well,
acceptance
you are
on the size.
discriminating. You are discriminating against other kids who, based upon merit, could get into school. So somebody who happened to donate some books or some money to the school can get their kid in.
Well,
That's discrimination.
that is true. That is absolutely correct. You write a large enough
You are
check, I don't care how
discriminating
dumb
based
your
upon
child
you're
is, your
discriminating for
child's going
kids.
to get in if you write a
Exactly.
large
You're
enough check.
discriminating on those kids who should be in that seat for somebody whose grandparents
Well, you call it
donated books or
discrimination, Tom.
donated buildings
They
who may
they
be
call it
dumb as
economic
rock.
survival.
It doesn't even matter the color. You're discriminating against kids who should be getting accepted in that school because their grandparent attended
Okay,
that school. That's
and tell them that
discrimination.
that's any other business. If you go wherever you go, if you pay more, you get more. You can expect more. And
But
there's
then,
nothing. That's an economic issue, not a
but then
legal
now
issue.
you're discriminating based upon
That's
economics.
not discrimination.
You're discriminating based upon the economic
Okay, so
situation.
so let me ask you this question. Um, I go to buy the wife a $120,000 SUV Mercedes, not to brag. Is it discrimination that she has a top of the line Benz versus someone who does not, who paid a lot less for their SUV? Is that discrimination?
You're talking apples and oranges because we're not
No,
talking
you're
about.
not talking apples and oranges.
We're not talking.
You're
We're talking
talking
apples and oranges
economics.
because we're not. We're talking about getting into a school that could change the trajectory of the next four
Okay, and how
generations.
you drive down the street,
You
or
cannot
the
compare
food
that
that you
to. You
eat,
cannot compare
or
that
where
to
you
an
shop, the
automobile.
clothes that you buy, Tom, all based on economics. And a lot of times you pay more to get more. That's just economics. That has nothing to do with discrimination. If I'm poor, I can't expect to dress as well as you. That's reality. I can't expect
Well, actually, some
to live
people
in a
do.
I
Actually, some
can't
people do.
expect to live in a house as
They
nice
don't
as
compare.
yours, Tom, or your neighborhood, to be able to travel the way you do. If I'm poor, is that discrimination? Because Tom
That,
can afford
that's
more?
what you would call, Jimmy, being creative. Even because there are some folks who might be able to dress or travel to wherever it is, being creative or being smarter about doing it. And that's what we're saying. If we're talking about the best institutions who want the best and the brightest, bring in the best and brightest across the board. It's the same thing if you're talking about sports. Because at the end of the day, if we want to just take this across the board, why don't you eliminate the affirmative actions that athletes get for going to the Georgias and the Alabamas and the Clemsons?
Well,
That's affirmative action as well.
a lot of athletes come from small schools also, Tom. It's
Mhm.
not all. I mean, you have a better chance if you come from a big school.
So why don't we say, hey, eliminate affirmative action for all of these athletes who go to the Alabamas, Clemsons, and Georgias? And you know what? They can only get into historically black colleges and universities now.
No, Tom, it's a matter of economics. So yeah, I think you're conflating the two. But we're going to move on
Yes, we are, Jimmy.
to what was the other ruling?
The other ruling, oh, Jimmy, we're gonna have to get this moving pretty fast. The student loan debt program that the Supreme Court struck down.
Okay, this is a quick one, Tom. If we didn't know, we should have known because here on Black Men Speak, I think I forewarned this was going to happen, that this was all just a farce to get black votes or to win college students or Gen Xers. Biden had no intention on honoring this pledge. After 40 years in the Senate, 8 years as vice president, 2 years as president, he knows how government works. He knew absolutely that he couldn't even get when he had a majority in the House, when the Democrats ran everything, he couldn't even get Pelosi and that group to pass a bill to give him this power. So he knew that Republicans were not going to give it to him. And he knew that if he just did it on his own, there was going to be challenged. He absolutely knew, Tom, there was no way in hell, a snowball chance in hell, that this was going to get through and be approved. He knew this. But he threw it out there in order to do people into voting for him. And fortunately for him, a lot of people fell into it. And so once again, our votes, we gave it away for nothing. What did we get in return? Oh, they said, well, the $30 billion I took away from HBCUs, I'm going to give it back to you, 10 billion in the form of debt relief on these student loans. Ha ha ha, the joke's on us. We're down 30 billion and we got nothing, zero in return for it. Nothing to show for it. So we can move on that one, Tom,
Yeah, we
and
can move on.
get on to our show.
It's partisan
So we've been
economics.
duped once again,
It's
and they're
about
laughing all the way
it's
to the
400.
voting machine.
It's a $400 million debt forgiveness package as opposed to the $800 million that went to the
40
rest of the
billion, Tom.
no, we're not talking about schools. We're talking about this student loan package, which would have cost
400
about
billion.
400 versus 800 for all the fat cats and businesses that got PPP loans forgiven. Let's
Yeah,
move
well,
forward.
some of those PPP loans have to be paid back, and some people are going to jail for scamming
Eight
on it.
hundred
So
billion down the drain, Jimmy, for
it
folks
is down to that. I agree
who
with you.
folks didn't even need it. The NFL, Jimmy, the NFL.
But well, when Tom, there's free money out there, people are gonna go out there and take it. That's just the nature of business.
But that poor
So
bitch out there who's trying to pay off loans $10,000, oh, that's too much.
you know what? I had to pay mine off. So if
All right,
you signed the paper and you took
but
the loan,
the NFL didn't. Okay,
the NFL didn't take you. Okay, well they
all
didn't.
right.
So if
Let's move to the next story.
last one,
The
last
last
one.
one has to do with the Colorado case, where the website designer they ruled in favor of the website designer who did not
Right,
want to provide services to a same-sex couple based upon freedom of speech,
of
and I
speech.
believe they're religious.
Right, and so this is one that that probably supersede. Basically, what they're saying is that the freedom of speech and freedom of religion supersedes the Commerce Clause. So generally, if you're open to the public, and you provide a public service or product, you have to provide that service equally to everyone under the Equal Protection Clause. But in this case, he was saying that he doesn't agree with same-sex marriages and don't want to build a website. And this is the same thing with the baker. There have been a lot of other examples where people have decided that they were not going to provide a service or a product to same-sex couples because they disagree with it on religious terms. So in this case, when you have two protections, which way do you rule? And in the past, we've always ruled in favor of society and forced businesses to provide the service or the goods, despite what you feel religiously. And now the Supreme Court is just basically saying that you just really can't, even for fair commerce, you can't force a person to violate their religious beliefs.
All right, Jimmy. With that being said, it is 8:21, so we have
So we went a little bit over our first segment.
we have already
But you
overspent our
know,
time on
our
this.
guests are in the bullpen, just revved up. They're ready to go. So
Yes,
let's
yes. And
so
we're
let's
gonna,
bring them on and get
we're
started.
gonna have to move our last story to next week, and of course, that's the essence thing. We just don't have time to
Oh,
talk about this.
yes, Tom. Give me a chance to check that one out for
Yeah,
myself.
there we go.
I haven't seen it.
We'll talk about that next week. So,
Oh,
with that being said, all right, we are here and we are ready to have our special guest here, our beautiful guest today, Miss Crystal
yes.
and Miss Yevette Christy. This has been a conversation that I have been chomping at the bit to talk about for a very long time. And, you know, it's interesting, human trafficking. We're going to talk about for the rest of our show. And the only reason I'm even aware of a small part of what I know is just because I've worked in the technology industry supporting law enforcement, and I begin to, you know, learn about things that I just wouldn't learn about otherwise unless I was in military law enforcement in those areas. And this is something that disproportionately affects our community in particular, and it was something that not just as citizens within our community, as parents, as those who have relationships with younger people, we have got to make sure that we understand the risk that is going on out there. So, ladies, thank you for coming to Black Men
Thank you.
Speak. We
Thank
welcome
you
you.
for having us.
Yeah.
Have you briefly to introduce yourself, and then we will begin to talk about our subject for the day.
Okay. My name is Crystal Hayward. I'm a detective with Tarrant County Sheriff's Office. I work in the Human Trafficking Unit. I've worked for Tarrant County for about 7 years. Prior to that, my experience came from Crowley, working in patrol as a school resource officer. Maneuvered over to the Sheriff's Office where I worked as a judicial bailiff and then transferred into um, CID where I work now in human trafficking as a detective.
Congratulations.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Miss Yvette.
So my name is Yevette Christy, and I am a survivor of commercial sexual exploitation. I have 28 years of lived drug addiction experience and 18 years as a sex worker, prostitute, which we'll talk about later. I am now I'm a United Methodist elder working on a doctorate at TCU. Yeah, and I work in the anti-trafficking space as a lived experience expert.
Both of you sisters are my heroes. Thank you.
All right, absolutely. So let's get to it and talk about. We don't want to assume anyone who may be watching tonight or may be watching in the future as to their knowledge base when it comes to trafficking. And before we do that, I do want to acknowledge a couple of guests that we have who are watching on the chat line. We want to acknowledge Miss Elisa Patterson. I want to thank you for joining us, counselor. She is an attorney, of course. We want to, of course, acknowledge Brother Asar Al-Kablan, Uncle Asar out of the Austin area. Thank you for joining us tonight. My good brother, Terrence Tyrone Burton. Thank you for joining us tonight. Very, very interesting in seeing what your comments have to say. Miss Marion Square, thank you for joining us. Brother Edward Willis, hey, we appreciate having you this evening. Brother Frederick B. Roberts out of Prairie View, Texas, thank you for joining us tonight. And let me see, I think Anthony, Yes, Anthony, we have on here as well, and he may be a first-time guest. We want to thank you, Anthony, for joining us tonight as well. Anthony Berryhill. There we go, Anthony Berryhill. Ladies and gentlemen, do feel free to jump in on the chat line, and the call-in number is available as well. If later on in the show, hopefully not 5 minutes before the show is over with, you can call in and ask any questions. Tell us, what is human trafficking? It is very broad. Tell us about human trafficking and its impact on this country and why it is so important for us to know more about.
So human trafficking essentially is an umbrella, right? And so under the umbrella, you have sex trafficking and you also have labor trafficking. To have either one of those, you're going to need force, fraud, or coercion. Okay. For an adult, force, fraud, or coercion is needed, but for children under the age of 18, you don't need those elements. So when we say force, that means someone that is physically restrained. They they're involved with physical harm, sexual assaults, beatings, things of those natures into commercial sex. With fraud, usually victims experience false promises. They're in dating relationships and their significant other is manipulating them into commercial sex, and they feel like that they owe their partner, to do this. When it comes to coercion, a lot of times is psychological manipulation and it's document confiscation. So they could take your trafficker or your pimp, which is essentially the same thing. They've been known to confiscate your IDs, your birth certificates, passports, a way of showing ownership. I own you, so I'm holding on to your ID. You belong to me. And also with coercion, they make threats to harm you and also people that are close to you. So when a victim is with their pimp or their trafficker, they don't want these people that they're close with and that they love and care about to get hurt, so they endure all this stuff that's happening to them because of threats from their trafficker that these things might happen to them.
Very sad.
How pervasive is this in the United States, in our communities? I know, looking at the research, it's about $150 billion, probably conservative estimate globally. But when we look at how common and pervasive it is, how common and pervasive is this?
Statistically, we can't even really get a solid number on how pervasive this tragic legacy is. And there's several reasons for that. Now, statistically, we do have some numbers. 30 million people across the globe right now, adults, are being trafficked. 10 million are under the age of 18. So the numbers are massive. And I think Texas is the second state in the nation in trafficking numbers. So that's important for us to understand. $970 million was made in 2021, I believe, for traffickers. So, and the reason that numbers are kind of hard, statistics are kind of hard to track down, is number one, a lot of people don't self-identify. I know growing up, there were women in my community, they did what they had to do to make sure they had what they had, what they needed. And sometimes women don't see themselves as that's trafficking. They don't feel like that's trafficking. They're making a decision. Another reason is people they don't want to report. There's a risk with calling law enforcement. There's a risk in reaching out for help. You could be harmed or killed. So there's a lot of reasons why. And even the National Trafficking Hotline, even they'll say on their website, the numbers are just
Put that number up.
The numbers are just hit and miss.
Could you take a moment to explain how you broke away, got away from it, but two, how you went on to get a PhD and do the work that you're doing?
I'm not done yet.
Okay, so you haven't done your dissertation yet. You're still working on it, but
yes, I'm in writing. So I tried to come out of the life many times, and the last time was I just went into a long-term residential facility. I lived there for 2.5 years. And when I came out, I just started going to school and raising my children and doing a lot of therapy and comprehensive care. There's a great deal of trauma. My story is not necessarily typical. Um, I was a prostitute, which means, in some people's definition, uh, that I self-sold, that I sold myself. That's another conversation because based on options and choices, you can't always make a healthy option. Um, but I started doing drugs when I was 9 with my mother, and sexual trauma with my brother began at 6. And so, 6-year-old brother coming into my room at 9 years old, my mother's like, "Let's get high." So I was on the streets for a long time, bound to my addiction. And then the last year of my life out there, I had a trafficker, and I gave birth to his son, and he's 19 now. Um, so yeah, I just did the work of going to therapy, getting comprehensive care services, education, communal support.
So you mentioned the young age at which you were traumatized. You mentioned the sexual violence. You mentioned the drug addiction, and in a lot of cases, you'll notice that the drug, the influence of drug and trafficking kind of go hand in hand. And if I'm reading, I don't know if the information was up to date that I read, that trafficking is the second largest or the second fastest growing industry and probably second largest next to drug trafficking, at least in the United States. Is that
Yeah,
all?
Probably correct.
That's correct.
I call it the trifecta:
Mhm.
pornography, addiction, drugs, and sex trade, trafficking.
So,
All
Miss
of those
Crystal,
together,
uh,
they work together like a little
yes.
petri dish. Yeah.
So, I've heard that we've misplaced about 87,000 kids who've come across the border, and not been able to track them. Do you know how many of those kids? I know some of them are ending up in meat factories and forcing to work, but do you happen to know how many of them are possibly involved in this sex business or being trafficked from a law enforcement perspective?
No, I personally don't know. I do know that there are times to where people will get sex trafficking or human trafficking and smuggling confused. So a lot of times when you do mention human trafficking, some of them will kind of touch a little bit on what you just said, with bringing people over across the border. You know, those things like that specifically deal with smuggling and not necessarily trafficking or whatever.
Okay.
Usually, trafficking involves like a third party that's getting compensated for the individual. As far as those numbers go, I don't know right offhand. Like she mentioned in the beginning, as far as the statistics go, I mean they change
And
very often.
we don't know where those children and youth were necessarily taken. But one of the vulnerabilities or insecurities that is huge, is the migrant. Sex trafficking, labor and trafficking is increased when you are displaced. That's just the first commodity that a young woman, a young person would have coming across the border or getting off a plane or a boat, is their body, is their person. And there's always a demand. So if I don't have anything else, I know that someone will pay me to do this, and I'll be able to eat and get shelter. So that's one of the huge insecurities with is immigrant populations.
No, you bring up a very interesting point because one of the things that I was reading is that those who are the perpetrators of this type of violence obviously prey on the vulnerable, the most
Right.
vulnerable, which are usually going to be folks who cannot protect themselves. That typically means children, younger children, and or women who physically may not be able to fight off against that. But then another thing that I found that I hadn't really considered, you mentioned being displaced, and so I started reading information on the significant increase in likelihood of being involved with trafficking if you are a part of the foster care system
Oh yeah.
or social care services. And so you mentioned, very simple and easy, the displacement, and especially if they are young and or displaced.
A lot of
One
those kids are kicked out of foster care at 18, so they find themselves homeless and needing things also: shelter, food, clothing.
So depending on what county you're in, they're now extending services to 20, 22, 25. If a young, it depends on the county, it depends on the state. If a young person decides to opt in for continued services, it's not necessarily residential, like you don't live with a family all the time anymore, but they do keep services. When I was a foster child and there were no services, so I did end up, like you just said, homeless and without resources. So any vulnerability, especially not just personal vulnerabilities, but when we're talking about, the number of Black and Brown, Indigenous, BIPOC people who are trafficked, vulnerabilities, financial, displacement, addiction.
Yeah, low income neighborhoods, mental health issues, growing up and witnessing trauma at a very young age. Um, let's see, drug addictions, social and family relationships. A lot, like she said, you're brought up and you're witnessing and you're seeing these things around you on a daily basis. So as a kid, you think it's normal, and you grow up, especially when I communicate with some of the victims that I do come in contact with. They often say, well, my mom did this, or my older sister did this. And so I'm late on my car note, or my rent is due, and I knew where to turn to. I knew I can make a quick $350 to pay my car note,
Yep.
or I knew I could, have a couple of appointments set up to be able to make rent. But they view that as being normal because somebody that they know and love did this the entire time that they were growing up.
And
Well, I
so the
certainly have had
system,
that in my family where family members have looked the other way
oh,
only because these young kids were bringing money in, even though you knew they were selling drugs, selling women, the things that they were doing to get the money. And so, and just bringing some money into the household doesn't make it acceptable and okay. But we seem to look the other way when it benefits us.
well, we
Absolutely.
were sharing earlier a little bit before the show started that, first of all, when we think about human trafficking, we have to look at the systemic legacy of sexual violence in this nation against Black and Brown bodies anyway, off the top. So that creates an epigenetic set of trauma responses in our bodies, especially as Black women. And we were also sharing how our culture almost, well, it celebrates the pimp hoe mentality.
It does now, that's for sure.
Well,
Yes.
it's been doing it for a long it's been doing it for a long time. Um, Women are sexually objectified, and there are systems in place um, that keep that industry open. A person can make more money with one trick than working 40 hours at Target. Like there's systemic issues that keep certain populations vulnerable.
That is so true. And so when we talk to our victims, and I know when I come in contact with them, when we set up our outreach operations, we go online and we respond to their sexual ads that they have up, and we get them to come to us. And so
Mhm.
when they show up to the hotel, that's our opportunity to find out, if they are indeed a victim of sex trafficking, or if this is something that they're just choosing to do. Either way, they're still a victim. We're still not really viewing them as a prostitute or whatever, because at some point they were victimized into that lifestyle. Um, so usually with that, we get them to try to, gain their trust or whatever and talk to them and let them know that there are people that are out here, to help them out. And law enforcement isn't like it used to be back in the day.
How,
Yeah,
how has that changed?
I'll let
Interesting.
her answer that.
How has that changed?
Woo! They was roughing us up back then. No, so there was a time when, being a sex worker, a prostitute was criminalized. We were not seen as victims. And I have two prostitution charges here in Tarrant County. Um, and it was not nice. It was brutal. And at one point, in my second arrest, I was a student at Texas Wesleyan University at the time, and I just kept going back out, back out. And the officers stood around me and said, "Look at you, college girl. Look at you sitting out here doing all this. There's a girl that would take your place at that school any day, like in my face, yelling at me." And it was crazy. But now the culture has changed, and women, people are seen as victims of exploitation. And I'm so happy about that because I was traumatized by law enforcement.
What do you believe created that change? in terms of the perception, in terms of how victims were handled, from being a criminal to more of a victim of a system?
I think Detective Hawthorne has to speak to that, but I will say, Hayward. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I think it was, for me, I think it was survivors being brought into that space to inform law enforcement. But Detective Hayward probably knows.
No,
You probably have a lot more women in law enforcement also that has actually probably helped shape some of that by bringing another point of view perspective to the conversation within the blue circle. But I'm sorry. Go ahead, Miss
yeah,
Haywood.
absolutely. I do agree with that. And then also, I mean, you have a lot of celebrities and media, getting involved and bringing awareness to this as well. And so we're able to get it out a whole lot more. We're able to do community outreaches. We're getting into schools. Um, shoot, what else?
Prevention and awareness. Yeah.
So I have a question, Detective. What is being done about these dating sites that are just fronts for prostitution?
So
Yeah.
what
Is there any effort to go after them, or is it really just trying to get the low fruit on the tree because it's easier to go after?
so actually going after a particular dating site is very hard. Somebody pointed out to me a while back. So it used to be the website called Backpage.
Yes, I've heard of that.
Okay, so the way somebody explained it to me was when they shut down Backpage, and it's like once you kill a spider, that's pregnant, whatever, it creates a bunch of different eggs or whatever.
Yeah.
A bunch of different babies are going everywhere. And so when that website got shut down, numerous of other websites were created. I mean, you can't even keep up with them.
Oh,
Like
wow. Okay.
they are
So
all
it went from one big platform to several smaller ones.
to several small. Yeah, and they are everywhere. And so we can't really do a whole lot about that. But what we are doing as law enforcement is we're setting up these operations that I briefly just spoke about, where we even do the demand suppression where we set up false ads online, and we have the Johns to respond to our ads. So when they show up, to the
Is it
hotel.
a tap on the wrist for them, or is it jail
No,
time? I mean,
so 2 years, September 2021, it went from being a misdemeanor to now a state jail felony.
okay.
So
Has that curbed any of the traffic? Because
I feel as
some,
though that it has, because from my experience in the very beginning, when I started working as a investigator in human trafficking, we were bringing them in like left and right. They were coming, by the dozens. And so I have noticed that maybe over the past year, that number has kind of slowed down a tad bit. And
what are your counterparts doing in Houston? Because I still have a couple of kin folks that are loading cars up with women and driving to Houston every weekend, supposedly to make money.
I can't really speak on Houston.
Okay.
I just know our efforts here in Tarrant County, and what we're doing here with the North Texas Task Force.
So that just goes to a deeper conversation that we have to have around why are women, I speak for women because I'm a woman, why are women getting in these cars to go to Houston? Like, we've got to start talking about culturally, why is it that why are we raised in this goop of sexual exploitation and violence, and why is it so tightly wrapped around the Black body?
Let me add, thank you, because Black women on average I saw one study that said 40%. I mean, I was absolutely stunned. It said 40% of the population were Black women, young Black girls, young Black women, which stunned me because you're talking 6% of the population. 40% of those who are trafficked.
Because we'll be celebrating it, Tom. It's cool.
And I thought that, I saw something else, and this is probably kind of high. 80% of the Johns happen to look like Caucasian men. And I was like, that seems pretty high.
No. There's not a particular look for a John.
Right.
Every John that we arrest, well, first of all, let me put it out there. About 85% of them are married, maybe 90. and then, but they're
But,
different
but
ones.
they
They're
said
Indian, they're
80%, because
white.
80% of them are Caucasian men.
I thought Caucasian men were like 60%.
Yeah,
And
it's
maybe
lower than
so.
that.
Maybe
But
so.
Caucasian men, from the last time I checked, they're the highest buyers. No?
Yeah, that for sure.
Statistically?
That for sure.
Yeah, they are.
But what
Go ahead.
I think Detective Hayward is saying is that there is no one look
Right.
for a John or a trafficker.
Right. Because what I thought when I thought about that, when I read that information, and I looked at the 400 plus odd year narrative of our existence in what we call the United States, any rate, and we look at who has owned and controlled the bodies of Black women for the vast majority of our ancestors' time here until our continuum in today. And it has been white men who've controlled Black women's bodies, Black men's bodies, from that matter, for commercialization purposes. And so it in a morbid way, it seemed like an extension.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you know what? Here's what I've noticed.
I think it's an extension. Yeah.
You know, I read the book, The Autobiography of Iceberg Slim, and I grew up in a criminal family. My father was a drug dealer, drug lord. So I understand, and I understand how a lot of them look down on pimps. They were all criminals, but in the hierarchy, pimps were at the bottom of that hierarchy. And when I look at some of my young cousins and kinfolks who are involved in that racket, when I go around them and see the girls they traffic, I'm expecting to see them oppressed and forced into this, but it seems like a lot of the girls are running the show. That they just have, you know, my knucklehead little cousins and stuff with them just to say they have a pimp. Not that they really need them or want them, because they seem to be running the show. They seem to be happy about it and excited about taking their trips down to Houston and making some money. It doesn't seem to That lifestyle doesn't seem to be what I read in the book about Iceberg Slim. So can y'all talk to this
That's just
mindset of
that's just one slice.
okay?
Your lens is just one slice, because I know personally.
Yes, I don't have a big view of all of them.
Right.
I'll hang
So
around those kind of folk.
I know personally, once the party's down and you're being sodomized or you're being punched in the back of the head while you're taking care of something, like, you know, what we may see is a good time, you know, shake your butt and get a bag type of mentality. It has a very violent, and what people are looking at oftentimes when they're looking at the top of the iceberg. They're not looking at that mountain is huge, the violence that happens to you psychologically. I still go to therapy to this day, and I've been off the streets since '08 because of the psychological trauma of what it means to be to experience force and coercion and fraud. Like, there's way more going on in the life of those young ladies and your kinfolk than what can be determined on the surface. It's a very violent. My book will be out at the end of this year,
Okay.
and I share explicitly some of the violence I endured. And so I tell young people all the time, please do not glamorize what you see on hip hop stages and music videos and
Mass media.
the player pimp balls we have, and we celebrate this mentality. We celebrate pimps and hoes. We still have players balls. So until our people take this more seriously, because we're not showing up. Crystal and I were talking about, we are in a lot of rooms where prevention, awareness, trainings are happening, and people of color are not showing up unless
Why
they're.
not, in your opinion? Why not, in your opinion?
Number one, I
Because-
think that we know. You were surprised by some of the statistics, right?
Yes.
And you're an educated man, right?
The depth of them. I mean, when I looked at the sheer depth of them.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. So the average person, unless human trafficking touches their life, they're going to read an article about it and they're going to keep on moving. So I think one of them is that just ignorance, just not knowing. And the second thing is, in my opinion, and in the Black community, we don't talk about sex, and we just, it's just not a conversation that we have about what's happening to our little girls, our young people across the board. We're just not having that conversation.
Let me dig a
Well,
little bit
when
deeper.
your book comes out,
Yeah.
you have to come back on the show and talk about it and promote it, please.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Tom.
So I'm going to kind of go back to something because it all comes down to money. I mean, it's
Mhm.
these women's bodies are a commodity, just like drugs are a commodity, just like
Correct.
corn is a commodity.
Cool.
But there is a significant real cost, not just economic, but a social cost to America. And then let's dig down deeper to our community in particular. So I thank you for bringing that up because it is catastrophic to our community because based upon the statistics, we are disproportionately affected by this crime. And, we probably know the least about it, even though it affects us the most. So what is and this is to either or both of you, doesn't have to be statistically that accurate, but when we look at the economic and social cost of this industry, help me understand your thoughts on that. It doesn't have to be in economic terms per se, but there's an economic cost, there's a social cost. Clearly, there's a spiritual cost as well.
I think one of the things that I want to talk about that is important for me. So, what I saw in my own family was the fracturing. So, because my mother was exploited, because my mother was poor, lacked education, she put herself in situations that I observed, and then look what happened to me. So we have to look at there's always an impact for violence in our communities. There's always going to be residuals from our women being harmed sexually, our little girls being sexually objectified. So we have to look at the societal impact and the limit on our liberation. We've actually taken beautiful little girls, beautiful people, young women, and we've just jacketed them with violence and vice. And so that's a legacy in and of itself. Something else to think about is the rule of law. I think Detective Hayward knows about what it looks like, the violence looks like behind the scene. So that's something else to look at, the rule of law. Laws are being broken, people are being drugged, sent across borders, taken from countries, all of these different things. Another element that I think we should think about is health. HIV, AIDS, infectious diseases, all of those types of things come
Still the
with,
number one killer of black women. Yes.
yeah, all of that comes with it. So in all the different ways that our communities are fractured, human trafficking is just another vein. But the dangerous thing is it leaves this permanent sexual legacy. And I know epigenetically, the young women that are existing today, great likelihood came from mothers that were sexually exploited, commodified, enslaved. So it's something that we need to get a handle on, or it's going to continue to destroy our communities.
Mm-hmm.
So, Detective Haywood, on some of the people that you capture, you say you guys run ads and you get them to come in, and when they're arrested, what's the typical profile? What are these? I know you said that a lot of them are married, so you mentioned that already. What are some other attributes that you would normally expect to see that you do see?
Oh man, we probably get the Johns to come in probably as young as, 20,
Okay,
probably as old as 70, maybe
uh,
older.
that's that's probably Viagra for you.
Yeah. But they're all walks of life. We get businessmen, we get professors, um, and other law enforcement.
Are they remorseful when you arrest them? Are they indignant about it? Like, I dare you arrest me, or I mean, what's their
No,
attitude and
they're
feelings about it?
they're very ashamed about it. Um, Very seldom have I came in contact with any of them that just didn't care. A lot of them are in tears, because they feel ashamed. They don't want their families to find out. They don't want to lose their
That's
jobs.
the problem.
It
That's the problem
messes
right
up their whole livelihood.
there. Yeah.
What was the arrest in Frisco? Was it early this year? There was like 42, a youth pastor,
Yeah, it was a youth pastor, and it
football
was
coach.
also a high school football coach.
So right here in Frisco, I think it was 42 arrests made.
Mhm.
And then
42?
Yeah, I mean, it's recent. It's within the last
Okay.
6
It
months.
was in January.
And then there was one, I was just looking it up. There was 115 arrests made in 2021 on online sex trafficking.
So that was the kickoff when it became a felony to solicit for sex online.
Good.
So prior to that, it was a misdemeanor. So when that got kicked off, like she said, that many arrests were made within a week.
Are these people be given consideration for being first time offenders, or is it just a straight 2 years? On some sentencing guideline.
I believe some of them have been. I hadn't really followed up on a lot of them. I mean, because we're doing these operations back to back.
Okay.
So we're constantly trying to lessen that demand, so the more attention we bring to it, the more arrests that are made, we lessen that demand. But then also we are educating these guys too when they do show up. We're letting them know the effects that they're having on these victims.
Mhm.
And when you mention to the Johns that show up, because that's what we call the sex buyers, a John. So when you mention to them, that they are driving the demand and this is all a part of sex trafficking, they're like, I'm not trafficking anybody. They freak out about that terminology, and when you educate them and let them know that the lady that you are talking to on the other end isn't always that person. Sometimes it's her trafficker that's communicating with you to get you
Mm.
to come to the hotel to have sex with them. And then also try to get them to view it this way. Do you have kids? I do have kids. You have daughters? Think of it as, you showing up to meet, somebody showing up to meet your 19-year-old daughter, and you have no idea about it.
But this is the thing. The other thing that I saw, which I'm not surprised by now, because I've learned a lot over the years. The average age, of a child
Probably
that
getting
goes into
younger.
trafficking, 12 years old.
Oh, the 14.
Yeah. The youngest that I've came in contact with is 17, but yes.
12 years old. I was reading, and it's like the average age, and I guess they're groomed. I mean, and you see unfortunate situations where you have folks who are Hollywood stars, rappers in the music business grooming these little
Yeah,
children.
there's some sick people out there, Tom.
Exactly. And so, what I'm hearing is that this has gone from the supply side, otherwise those who have been victimized by the system, to the demand side, I guess what you will call Johns, and then you have your middle people, their handlers or whomever you talk about that. And based upon your experience, I mean, is it one area that's more effective than the other? Ultimately, we understand that this industry has been around since the beginning of time. But when we look at the social impact in our communities, our families, the lifelong trauma that you're dealing with, that's a lot, and it disproportionately affects our communities. And so that's why I felt that it was important to have. And Jimmy, I'm going to make a decision. We're going to have to add at least 10 minutes to this conversation, even though it's almost
I
not.
was just getting ready to say we're going to maybe answer that question and
Yeah.
then do our wrap up.
No,
But
absolutely. It is mainly our community. When I'm at the hotel room and when we do our outreach operations and we respond to the sex acts that are up, we portray like we're the Johns and they show up. Usually it is a Black female that comes. And a lot of times the first person that they see is some of the other officers that I work with, which are normally white males. So instantly they freak out. They don't care the fact that we're in plain clothes and they're telling them that they're not going to jail. We're just trying to help. It really isn't until maybe I come around the corner or come out of the restroom and I'm like, hey, we are here to help you. And a lot of times I tell them my first name. My name is Crystal. Can I talk to you for a second? And because they look like me, it's they can relate more to me and I can relate to them. So a lot of times they're like, well, I'll talk to her, and we're able to get them to kind of calm down and talk to us a little bit because there is somebody in the room that can relate to them. So.
okay.
So when we talk about action items, what do families need to know? What are the risk factors? What do families need to do? Where You mentioned the church in particular, because in a lot of cases, families will look the other way. The church maybe not addressing what's considered to be taboo issues. Is there a lane for historically Black colleges and universities, or higher education institutions? What other institutions, systems, and families are at play here, and what should their role be in helping to curb, eliminate, and mitigate risk?
Tom, you need fathers in the home to stop this.
The
At
first
least
thing to
curb
think
some
about
of
the first thing to think about is just education. I tell people all the time, because we are not necessarily people of color necessarily, but we will get on the phone and just call in a minute about something just because we read an article. We have got to sit down with this issue and be educated. It's not enough to go on two websites and then go start looking out the window wanting to call people. Educate yourself. Start going to local task force meetings. Start going to public trainings from agencies in your area. The Net, Alive at Last, A21,
Five Stones.
Just start going to these meetings and getting educated. That would be the first thing I say, is to educate yourself on the.
So, Miss Yvette, I don't mean to cut you off, but we're short on time. Did you have a father in the household?
I had men in the household.
You had men, your mother's men, but not necessarily your father. Do you think it would have made a difference if you had a strong father figure in the household who was a protector in your particular situation?
Yeah, I'm sure.
And so this is my challenge for Black men. When you're not there in the home to protect your children, all kind of bad things can potentially happen to those children if you're not there to protect them. And so, I mean, we can ask institutions like church, the schools, law enforcement, the government, to try to do what they can to help curtail this situation. But ultimately, the mother and the father need to be in the house. So even if you're not together, it's still your children, and you have an obligation and responsibility legally and spiritually and socially to protect those children and to become adults where they can make decisions for themselves. If you're not there, Miss Yvette is a living example of what can potentially happen. Now, I would just say to your daughter, but these things happen to boys also, on some occasions.
Mm-hmm. So
And
the vulnerabilities are poverty, mental illness, drug addiction. Those are some of the things that you asked. What are some of the risks that we should be looking for? Those are some of the things. If you work in a school, if you work at a church, anywhere where our children and youth go, you need to be educating yourself on this, whether it's at the YMCA or the Parks and Rec Center. Um, just be
And
aware.
I don't know language wise, Tom and ladies, if men are still walking around greeting themselves with this, what's up, pimp? I know 10 or 15 years ago, when I would be confronted with that, I would be highly upset when a Black person approached me that way. I never had a white person call me pimp, but it seemed to be the term for how Black men were greeting each other, either pimping or big pimping. Is that still going on? Is that still part of our language lexicon, or have we moved on to something else?
Not in my circle or my environment. I don't necessarily hear that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I don't know, have you? Where the guys are referring to each other as,
Oh yeah, what's up, pimp?
oh.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. What's up, pimp?
What's up, pimp?
It used to be
But
what's up, brother,
we
or
talked about this. We talked about this. That's going to happen. That has to happen in the mind of the Black man first. Each and every single individual Black man has got to get a handle on their pornography, how they look at women, how they think about women, because our sons and daughters aren't going to get anything different until we start thinking differently about one another.
which
So,
should be an insult that someone thinks that you're relying on a woman to someone else to take care of you and go out and make a living for you rather than you doing it yourself, and or in reverse that you're going out to the work to take care of your wife or your spouse and your children.
yeah.
parents, what is it that you would share with parents out there who may or may not know, considering the age of children who are being coerced into this system?
I say monitor their social media.
Definitely.
A lot of traffickers, they use social media as a way of recruitment and grooming. And so, like adults do, everybody's quick to go on the Facebook and put their statuses up, how they're feeling, what they're going through, things like that. teenagers, kids can do the exact same thing if they have those same profiles. And so if there's a trafficker that's online and see that, they feed off that. They know how to get close to that kid to let them know, well, hey, yeah, your parents, they do suck. Or yeah, if your parents aren't doing this for you, I can do that for you. What is it that you're wanting?
Cash app.
Yeah. How about I send you some money real quick? So
And they can take their time with it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So that grooming process starts, very early on, and it can continue for a while until eventually they owe that trafficker.
Do you
And
think public shaming would help if we advertise these arrests in the newspaper or put them on Facebook or YouTube?
They do.
they do that now.
They do?
I've seen it.
Oh, I haven't. I didn't know that. Well, okay.
A friend of mine just called me 3 months ago. Her husband in Fort Worth was arrested for prostitution,
Hmm.
and his picture was everywhere. And he denied it and said he was trying to help her change a tire. Um, so no, they're doing that. I said, boy, he
Okay.
needs to change
Is
those
there and that's responsibility and or things to look for a parent? Is there a lane, and I know this could probably be a very touchy issue given the conservative nature of our churches. Is there a responsibility and or a lane that church who historically at least set the tone and values within a lot of our households? What would you say they could contribute, if anything?
They can contribute well, I grew up in a church where a woman was considered insignificant. She had to stand down. She wasn't allowed to teach. She was just a missionary and a cook. There's a slippery slope
And that's been a Baptist.
there's a slippery slope with diminishing someone, right? If I
Right.
diminish you this much and then I'm sexually objectifying you, then we need to pay our rent. And for me, it began, part of it began in the church. And so I'm not talking about, hey, go have a Sunday school class. We just talk about raw sex. What I'm talking about is appropriate curriculum that you can find. There's curriculum that you can find to just educate parents, and then to begin to educate middle schoolers. About insecurities and how we feel about ourselves, because social media has made that dissonance between who I am and who I want to be even deeper. So now I have these standards of beauty that I'm trying to keep up with. I'm trying to look at like Cardi B. I'm trying to be and so for our young people, it's important that we're teaching them psychological warfare, spiritual warfare, and because psychologically that all we have to do is keep attacking our children with these images of what beauty and wealth and success look like. And then you have a whole generation that's extremely vulnerable. These young women that I mentor, they are so insecure, unsure about themselves. And that's because they have a standard of beauty that I didn't grow up with. All I had was Jet magazine.
Yeah.
Now they got
You have a lot.
they have
So
women from
prevalent.
Brazil on their phone. Like you can
Yeah.
see the whole world now. And
Yes.
so we just have to
Good
really
point.
make sure that our churches are teaching young girls that they're valuable and intrinsically worthwhile, and that they do not have to have a man to have value.
Right. They are the value. With that being said, why don't we take the last 2 minutes and each one of
Yes.
you give a closing statement, a parting statement, and before we close the show
And,
down.
and we're definitely going to have both of you back. This feels like just scratching the surface. We're going to definitely have to have you both of you back.
So let's start with the detective.
Um,
Yes,
I would
Detective
just
Haywood.
I would just like to say, for people just to be vigilant. Pay attention to your surroundings. I know everyone, including me, I'm getting away from that now. Everybody wants to mind their business and stay in their own lane. But if you see something, say something. If something just doesn't sit well in your spirit, contact, law enforcement and let them do their jobs, and let them be the judge to see if whether or not it's worth investigating. But I think that if you see certain situations that just seem off, you should definitely speak up about it, and keep that open line of communication with your kids as well. You don't always be so hard on them when bad decisions are made. Have more discussions versus just coming down on them to where you're driving them away.
Yeah.
Okay.
Educate
Miss Yvette.
yourself. Just educate yourself. Please try to show up to some of these task force and trainings. here in the DFW North Texas area to educate yourself and be a part of a community that's doing this work. And make sure there's safety protocols that you can put on your social media at home. So there's, I forget the name of there's different programs you can actually put on phones and gaming systems to help protect your children as well.
Okay. Well, thank you,
Excellent.
ladies.
Excellent.
With that being said, we're going to close the show out, Tom. And for everyone, we will be back here next week. Same time, same channel. Tom, I'll give you the closing word.
We want to thank you both again. This has been an outstanding show. A lot of great content. We're definitely going to have you back. We want to thank everybody out there who tuned into this week's show. Hope you got some great information. We will definitely have to have these two sisters back. We appreciate your time. Have a good week and good weekend. Good night, everyone.